So let me ask you something. Why does the very idea of ending the monetary system seem so abhorrent to almost everybody? Why is it so difficult for most people to imagine a world without money? Almost all the feedback I've had to date about the global free society ideology has been logical and constructive, except when I mention ending the monetary system. Most people will automatically find this idea ridiculous and dismiss it without further consideration. How can you get goods, food, services, and who would make the stuff if no one was being paid? Surely that just demonstrates how indoctrinated we all are. We all believe we must have a monetary system to make the world go round. And the very thought of not having money is so alien to everyone that the very possibility of ending it immediately throws up hundreds of unanswerable questions. And I say unanswerable because not many people have ever pondered the possibility with any seriousness. But what I do find when I question people's aggressive reaction to this possibility is that they've never really considered a world without a monetary system. But why? It's just a man-made concept. And their reaction is almost automatic, but never based on any real depth in consideration. I mean, what was your reaction when you read the title of this presentation? Whatever way you look at the monetary system, it is a control system. So why are we all addicted to a control system, to a man-made concept holding back humanity, holding humanity captive? And there is a term for this, and it's called the Stockholm Syndrome. The definition being feelings of trust or affection felt in many cases of kidnapping or hostage taking by a victim towards a captor. Does that sound about right? So my objective in this presentation is to show you how all our lives will be transformed in such positive ways just by this simple change, the ending of the monetary system. And what I want to achieve here is to show you that not only how amazing life would be without the shackles of debt slavery, but that also that it's possible. And that's the key point here. It is possible. We can survive and in fact flourish far more without a monetary system than with one. And I'll show you how it can be implemented in a timescale so you could witness this happening and feel the advantages in your lifetime. So that's my goal. But remember, the end of the monetary system is a key strategy within the global free society and has to remain so to make the whole plan, the whole concept work. But the tactics and ideas I highlight are just my vision, my ideas at this point of the concept's infancy. So global free society 1.0, if you will. But money is a man-made concept that has served us well to date. But what if that concept is now provably out of date? What if it became self-evident that the monetary concept is actually holding us back as a species, causing division in society, famine, pollution, misuse of resources, and completely false values in all walks of life? And of course, the one we all know, war. And war is extremely profitable for some people in our global society, as I think we all know. It's the 1%. You know, war is a rich man's racket, as we all know, and we've been repeating for centuries, but we've been doing nothing about it. But money is just a tool of exchange, and it can be ended over time just as easily as it was started. Originally, the promissory notes we use today were backed with gold, but not anymore. So in stark reality, the money we use today is actually worth nothing. Only the promissory or the promise of value that we agree. And only through our consensus of agreement does money actually have any worth. And the problem we have with the monetary system is it completely changes our values on everything in our lives. Everything in our world is measured with a monetary value, including our time and our lives in general. The money fosters and encourages a society of individuals where selfishness is not only accepted but encouraged and admired. I mean, we value gold higher than clean water or clean air. We value profit over human safety, over quality of life, over safe working conditions, over life itself in many instances. And companies striving for competitive advantages will move production to where the labour is cheaper in a heartbeat if they feel they can make more money elsewhere. And there is little or no consideration for the damage it does to the local community they leave behind. Forests and oceans are depleted and polluted in ever-increasing search for more profit. Regard for the environment is often seen as an unnecessary cost. And family time. Now that's a luxury mainly demoted to the weekends. And if you're lucky, a paid 4 weeks holiday once a year. We spend almost our entire adult lives working just to earn enough money to live our lives day to day. And ironically, because we are working, we don't have enough time to actually enjoy the benefits of our labours to the full. So the vast majority of our life is spent in the pursuance of money, not actually living the lives as we could or should. Are we mad? Does this sound sane at all on any level? Working all our lives to only retire when our bodies are starting to fail us. The very best healthcare is only available to those with enough money. Those without can suffer even if a treatment or a cure is only walking distance away. The monetary system dictates who gets a good education and who doesn't, even though it's in everyone's best interest to educate the entire global population for many, many reasons. The entire monetary system forces one man against the other, both wanting to give the least and receive the most, because that's how you make a profit. And we accept all this as the norm. It's just the way it is. But this is all just the tip of the iceberg. If we are to argue against the false values that the monetary system, a control system, enforces upon us. And that's exactly what the monetary system is. It is a control system. It used to be a necessary method of exchange, but now it controls us all. And that's the very system most people want to protect. Why, if we don't have to? Now, we could talk about this for many, many hours, but we really don't have time. We have more positive things to discuss. Okay, so let's assume I've at least piqued your interest that the monetary system is not perfect and in fact could be damaging to humanity's progress. Let's then move on to the next part. So how quickly could we transition to a moneyless society? Could we transition to a moneyless society overnight? Definitely not. I think we all know what would happen if we made everything free tomorrow. You wouldn't even find a tin of baked beans for 100 miles, and I would definitely be first in line at the Ducati dealership. The stores would be completely empty, so obviously this is not an option. But please don't consider how we would make this a reality at this particular moment, because we will cover that in much, much more detail later on and in further presentations. So for the moment, just consider the world that I'm describing and consider if that future looks better for you and your family with or without a monetary system. Is that vision better than the future that you're facing now? And although I am suggesting this would take several years to introduce, maybe not as many as you think, the immediate benefits, even before we eradicate money, will change the world almost instantly for the better. Every aspect of our lives would completely change if we all knew we were working to a moneyless system. Imagine just the psychological impact that would have on you and your family by removing all financial worries. Worries about a pension, healthcare, education, or even being supported in your elderly years. So the initial questions you probably have are, if there's no money, then how do I get my staff? Who would make it? And where do I get it from? Do we still have shops, etc.? A reasonable set of questions. So let's explore this first. The simple answer is that we would need to be as self-sufficient as possible within our group or society. Not necessarily 100% self-sufficient in the initial rollout phase, but the end goal, the long-term plan, is of complete self-reliance. And with recent global events, I don't think that's such a bad thing, do you? And we must work together as a group of countries. This cannot be a single country's initiative if we are to flourish in the manner I know we can. So let's break this down into bite-sized chunks. The first thing we would need to do is identify which countries working together in a global free society would give us this possibility first. The possibility to provide all the goods and services we need to allow us to remove the monetary system within our temporary borders. And in the book Global Free Society, I highlight 17 desirable countries. But they are not a comprehensive analysis. It's just an example to explain the concept, the principle. So I've chosen these countries in the book because they all have very different qualities and bring different challenges to the example that I'm detailing. So in my example, we run with 11 countries of a possible 196, and 3 of those come under the European tab. So our first job is to start building our critical path. Which country can produce which goods, which services, which resources, etc. So we need to produce a list of all these resources, including physical, intellectual, and manpower, which is very, very important. But before we go any further, I have a spoiler alert. To enable us to implement a monetary-free society, all major infrastructure and large corporations will need to be brought under the control of our society members. And the vehicle we would use to accomplish this is nationalisation. So transport, healthcare, banking, education, communications could all be considered. In fact, all large corporations that provide an essential service to our community. And this topic sits much better later on in the book and in presentation under the heading of implementation. And there we will go into far more detail about this topic. I needed to make that clear now, as most of the assets I list are currently in private hands. But clearly they will need to be nationalised for the benefit of the 99%, not just the 1%. And the first step is to take an inventory of our physical resources within our member countries and try to ascertain what resources we have at our immediate disposal. So let's look at the top 10 most tradable resources first as an example. And bear in mind this list was compiled back in 2014, so it is out of date, but that really doesn't matter, because what I'm trying to show you here is the process, not the actual facts as of today. We would then need to consider minerals and aggregates. And in this chart I've just shown the top 10 tradable minerals and aggregates, again as an example. But this data will allow us to know where our surplus or our deficit is. Where we have a deficit, we can look to increase production or alternatively import from countries outside of our society. But we have a moneyless society. How do we trade overseas, I hear you ask? Well, initially we would still operate a monetary system for our society's needs, allowing goods and services to be traded with countries outside of our society, outside of our borders. Only internally will we operate a moneyless system. And this will possibly be necessary until all countries eventually join our global system. So yes, that's the aim. To include all countries on the planet is the long-term goal. Or we end importing goods once we are completely self-sufficient within our own short-term borders. So we manufacture and produce all the goods and services we need ourselves. And this is a prime goal for the early stages of the concept, independence within our own society. We'll cover this later on in more detail under implementation. But let's just say for now that we would be in a very strong position with these example countries and the resources that I've detailed at our disposal. We would also have a strong buying power. Again, much more detail on this later on. The next category we need to consider is our food production. Obviously very, very important. So we would carry out the same exercise that we've just previously completed. And we would look at our current production and our maximum potential. In the example I've shown in the book, one category the 7 countries would not be able to produce is coffee. Therefore, this is a commodity we would need to import. And I mean, God forbid we didn't have coffee, right? But we will be able to do this easily with our buying power, as we will discover later on in the presentation. So with our basic resource needs covered, we would then need to take an inventory of our intellectual and physical assets held outside of our borders. And this is important as it contributes greatly to our buying power and also helps with a tactic that we will need to leverage later in the presentation. One good source of society income would be through intellectual assets such as trademarks and patents owned within our society. And this would allow a constant income from outside our borders should we need it. And property owned by a society held outside of our borders would also allow us either an income stream or the opportunity to sell the property and realise that cash value. This could be anything from factories, infrastructure or retail premises. So I won't go into the detail here that I do in the book, but there are endless ways our society would generate money to buy the goods or resources we temporarily might need. So please bear in mind that when I say use assets outside of our borders for income generation, I'm talking about acquired assets released from the process of nationalisation. Hopefully it's obvious now that global free society will never take personal possessions away from anyone, as that goes completely against the freedoms outlined and guaranteed. So now we've completed our first stage of committing to a global free society. We know what we can produce, manufacture, and what our intellectual capabilities are, our human resources. However, we don't really know whether these resources will meet our demands. How can we if we do not have an end goal? What are we actually trying to achieve? So without knowing what we're trying to achieve, how can we gauge if our resources are sufficient or not? So of course I'm grossly oversimplifying the process here, but the idea is that if we're not planning on any major changes to society, then from the previous charts we would be very self-sufficient. But what happens if, for example, we want to build new housing concepts, new shopping centres, new cities, new leisure facilities, new hospitals? And the main consideration is going to be automating all unnecessary processes, all manufacturing and even food production, for example. And this will obviously be very important to consider if we're to realise the goal of leisure time set out in our vision statement. So now we have to consider, do we have the capacity to achieve these goals now? And if so, to what degree? So to understand our requirements fully, we have to establish what our end goal is. We know from our mission statement what type of life we want, but how would that look physically? Do we have the facilities to deliver our vision? And that vision could be 30, 40 or 100 years into the future. But until we establish exactly what it is we're striving to achieve physically, we can't start building or allocating resources. And this, in my mind, has been a major problem with humanity to date. Our growth globally has been almost completely organic. We have not been building and developing our society with an end goal in mind. We have been reactive. We've not been proactive. So what will the future look like? Where will we produce the goods to reduce our impact on the planet and to achieve sustainability? What new ways of working can we implement to reduce human workload and increase leisure time? What steps can we make to reduce pollution and consumption? But just because our plans are set quite far into the future, it doesn't mean we cannot make huge progress in the short term. We can make huge and positive improvements almost immediately, but just because the end goal, the long-term plan, is possibly not within our own lifetimes, we shouldn't be disheartened. The very long-term goals may not even be within your children's lifetime. And to be honest, if our plans were achievable in our children's lifetimes, I would be really disappointed. That would just show a huge lack of vision and creativity, which I know we are definitely capable of. Humanity is visionary. Humanity is creative. But we must have a clear understanding of our purpose on Earth and where we're heading and what we are collectively trying to achieve as a species. Wouldn't life make much more sense then if we all knew that and how each of us could play our own part in achieving our aims? I mean, wouldn't you feel much happier in your work if you knew you were working for the future of humanity and not some faceless corporate investor? Wouldn't you? So now we've nationalised our key infrastructure, taken inventory of our assets, we must agree upon a physical roadmap. So what do we have to invent, build or recycle in order to allow us to enjoy the kind of life we promised ourselves in the vision statement? Do we all live in cities, the country, or do we live underground? What are the options and the benefits of each of those possible solutions? Now, creating a vision of the future and understanding the real physical challenges that we might face and the possible logistical issues we must overcome is quite a specialist subject. And it's not really something a person with a background in business would competently consider and present. So let's consider someone who has spent the best part of his life researching and exploring alternative ways in which humanity could prosper and live in symbiosis with our planet. Jack Fresco, founder of the Venus Project, has been a huge inspiration to myself. And most of the views and aims of the Venus Project are shared by me and are found in the DNA of the book and also these presentations. And for those of you that are unaware of the Venus Project, let's have a quick look at how they describe themselves and their aims. The Venus Project proposes a holistic approach with a global socio-economic system that utilises the most current technological and scientific advances to provide the highest possible living standard for all people on Earth. The proposed system is called resource-based economy. The term and meaning were coined by Jack Fresco, the founder of the Venus Project. In a resource-based economy, all goods and services are available to all people without the need for means of exchange such as money, credit, barter or any other means. For this to be achieved, all resources must be declared as the common heritage of all Earth's inhabitants. Equipped with the latest scientific and technological marvels, mankind could reach extremely high productivity levels and create abundance of resources. Resource-based economy concerns itself with the three main factors, namely environmental, technological and human. And I would really highly recommend you visit the website and explore their years of research and obvious expertise in this area. To summarise, they detail how a society of the future could function in a sustainable way without harm to the planet. And they look at various solutions including building cities on the oceans, which when you look at the advantages is an intriguing solution. Automation is a key part of the Venus Project and is essential in delivering a lifestyle to humanity. A lifestyle we've promised ourselves in our vision statement. They also propose a society without a monetary system and with people being at the heart of all decisions. So extremely similar to what I'm proposing thus far. We share the same DNA. So why do I use the Venus Project in our discussion on what our long-term future could look like? Simply as an example, a visual representation on how creative and visionary humanity can be or should be. Something woefully missing with our current political parties globally, hopefully you'll agree. And I do not think anyone would welcome a singular and clinical looking solution to all our living needs. Not that I'm suggesting the Venus Project only considers a futuristic one-size-fits-all solution, because they don't. We simply cannot turn our backs on the thousands of historic cities and buildings we already have. But we can certainly improve the existing infrastructure and make it more efficient, cleaner, and less impactful on our resources and our environment. For argument's sake, let's assume we now have our long-term plan as showcased by the Venus Project. To get there, we will need a short-term plan and a mid-term plan. For the short-term plan, we would need to address the immediate issues facing us today. And the idea here is that once we know where we're heading, we have to resolve the immediate challenges holding us back as a society. These are challenges that could stop us or slow our pursuit of our long-term plans. So let's look at what a short-term plan could look like. Now, in my book, I detail 9 areas of society that need urgent attention. So let's just go with that train of thought for now. And the main areas of immediate concern, as I see it, are as follows: consumption, sustainability, pollution, the environment within and outside the global free society, new member countries, education, eradication of poverty, eradication of oppression, war, and poor leadership. We don't have time to go through all these chapters, so let's just concentrate on the key points to give you an idea of how the global free society would tackle these shorter term issues with a view to putting us on track for our longer term goals. Download the free PDF version of the book if you want to know more detail. Lowering consumption does not mean we will have less choice of goods. The global free society is completely consumer driven. It is not about making you go without the goods we all like. It's about producing them intelligently and sustainably. You will not feel there are a lack of options, quite the contrary. In fact, the necessity is to only produce the very best quality goods that we can. Longevity of all products is absolutely key to our success. And that's a major part of the strategy to reduce consumption. How will we do this? Through consolidation of our production facilities and services. As the industrial world has grown over the last 100 years, it has grown organically and largely without direction. Demand has driven the growth of factories and goods production, sometimes falsely creating demand through an abundance of goods we didn't even know we needed. In fact, that's generally how production works. Companies need to produce goods to sell in order to make profits. They can't stop producing. And this form of production is inherently ineffective and wasteful. If the real demand for sink plugs is, say, 5 million per year, and you have 5 companies making 2 million per year, we have too many sink plugs. What a waste of resources. Not just in the physical completed item, but in the design, the manufacturing, the packaging, shipping, distribution, and storage of these additional 5 million sink plugs. So now take that one item and multiply it 1 billion times or more, and you have a better idea of one of the major issues driving consumption on planet Earth. There is no universal product demand fulfillment program, so over and underproduction are always a factor. We have a vast multitude of companies competing in every area of production globally, all making similar goods. And as the monetary system dictates, each company strives to show an increase in sales every year, doing everything they can to increase their order books, which ultimately leads to an increase in consumption of their products. Someone has to buy the goods, right? So this is great for the company, but very bad for our planet. And the list is endless, literally, and covers all aspects of our lives, such as food, clothing, cars, electronics, pharmaceuticals, tools, white goods, etc., etc. I mean, how much food do we throw away every day because of the sell-by date expiring? But this is how it is today. It's not how we would tackle production in a global free society. We don't have to think like this anymore. Our measure of success is not driven by consumption, but by reduced consumption, or smart consumption is a more accurate term. We don't have to produce goods just for the purpose of circulating money. We now only need to produce goods based on real needs, real demand. The major win for us as a new society is that we can now consolidate production. Why would we consolidate production? For many reasons. It's far less resource rich having 1 or 2 manufacturing plants than dozens all making essentially the same product. It also allows us to greatly reduce and control pollution. However, the main reason that we can consolidate production is because we've now eliminated competition within our borders. So now the car brands, for example, can still retain their identity but share knowledge of the best ways to lower pollution, reduce wastage, and make the products safer, more reliable and durable. So just like our negative example on sink plugs, we can now turn that example to the car industry And we can only produce vehicles we know we have a need for, not just to keep the factory producing, just to keep money turning. For example, Ford, Fiat, Citroën, Vauxhall, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, Alfa Romeo, Toyota, Audi, Seat, Honda, Nissan, Renault, Mazda, Mitsubishi, the list goes on and on. All making a 1.8 litre engine, all utilising a separate manufacturing facility with all the resources associated with running that production. Do any of us really care about who makes the engine? As long as it's safe, reliable and economical. The same could be said for the chassis, the working parts, the electrics. Who really cares about that element? What we care about as consumers is that the car looks good, that it's safe, reliable, and ultimately fit for purpose. In a consolidated production, we would still offer the consumer choice through each brand's identity, but share the working parts. And of course, the engine we choose to produce would be the very best amalgamation of the shared technology within our society. And of course, some of these brands will be outside of our society initially, but even just amalgamating and consolidating just a few in these initial stages would bring huge benefits in reducing pollution and the drain of our resources. And the same ethos could be applied to just about every product group or every consumer product type you can think of. So would you really care if your working parts in your washing machine across all brands were the same? Your dishwasher, your freezer unit, TV? Well, of course you wouldn't, just as long as it did what it was supposed to do and was reliable and safe. As the society expands, we would incorporate the brands held within these new joining countries into our technical know-how and our manufacturing capacity. So the internals are shared, but the brand, the look of the item will be different. So reducing consumption through smarter, more sustainable manufacturing and not reducing choice for the consumer. There is much more detail in the book. Another major factor for supporting this more efficient production method is addressing and eradicating inbuilt obsolescence. And this is a very key tactic. Production must now be focused with longevity in mind. So let me ask you, how many products have you ever thrown away just because it's deemed cheaper to buy a new one than to investigate the problem and fix it? I think we're all guilty of that. But what if that was considered at the point of design, with fault finding being an easy process? Maybe the product is modular, so the faulty part can be easily diagnosed and replaced at home. And this would also make the product more easily upgradable, again adding more lifespan to the product and reducing consumption, but not choice. The ethos would be applicable to all goods: computers, cars, white goods, televisions, and all high value items that require a lot of resource to produce. Just by making goods last longer, we can reduce our consumption of goods drastically. Instead of inbuilt obsolescence, we will move to inbuilt durability and longevity through better design and better components. And having repair and upgradability considered in the design phase will massively reduce consumption. A complete reversal from where we are today and still retain choice for the consumer. But this can only be achieved through a consolidation of production, a system where the manufacturers work together and share resources, technologies and innovation, where they work together to ensure that we are working to a sustainable and pollution-free environment. And this now means that everything will be compatible within our society. Wow, imagine that. No more checking if the program is supported by your device. No more compatibility issues. Oh, and those silly tricks that certain brands use to force you to buy new headphones by changing the socket for the device are gone. Your phone, for example, will synchronize with your car and every other device you own. Upgrading will be easy as the replacement parts will be compatible as they were designed to be from the start. It also means we won't have multiple versions of the same product. Satellite navigation is a really good example of this. So instead of what we currently have, multiple brands all offering a similar software solution, we can use the very best version for everyone, and it will work on all devices. And just no more competing software. What a huge saving in resources that alone would be. Everything in production would also have recycling factored in at the design stage. Certain components or minerals can now easily be removed at our recycling plants, as they have knowledge from the manufacturer of what is in the product and how to remove it. And we can now consider only using biodegradable packaging everywhere. Of course, there might be some exceptions. But overnight, we could greatly reduce the plastic problem, something that cannot be done in the current system we operate today, in a capitalist model where we all compete against each other. By reducing our production footprint so dramatically as we've just discussed, we can now reduce pollution in many ways. Having one large factory where we once had 10 or 20, we can instantly see a major reduction in the pollution we generate. And if we're building new production facilities, then obviously this will be a major consideration when designing the facility. Not only the amount of pollution produced, but safely collecting and disposing of all polluting materials. And cities are the second largest pollutant after manufacturing, therefore this area needs to be the focus of our activities to lessen, control and ultimately eradicate pollution. And without monetary considerations, we can now look at more creative solutions to lower pollution. And one example I discuss in the book is through only utilising electric cars in cities. And now we aren't restrained from the shackles of money, we could consider having electric cars available throughout the cities. And there really is no need for personal ownership, with car share being a much easier and convenient solution used in tandem with a good public transport service. Traditional car hire centres could then be made available outside the cities for anyone making a longer personal journey. There's much more detail in the book, but making deliveries at night could also reduce not only pollution but congestion in the cities. And think of the drop in pollution if we made all delivery vehicles electric. And switching from printed to digital material is also another quick win. And the trend has grown quite significantly since I wrote the book in 2015, but there is still major gains to be made today. Something like 12.5 million tonnes of paper and cardboard are used in the UK every year, and it takes 24 trees to make just 1 metric tonne. That's 300 million trees just in the UK. And if we adjust that figure to give a broad calculation just for the example members in our society, we get 86.4 billion trees per year that we would save. Computer programs, music, films, and all information can now be supplied purely via digital means. Within our society, we could collectively choose whether we want to eradicate consumable production on things like daily newspapers, magazines, and even books. Do we really need to make these items when we all have access to a digital version? And of course, it wouldn't be a complete eradication. There could possibly be an interim solution. But think of the resource savings alone globally just on those consumer products. As we now do not want to encourage consumption, we can look to package our products just for the purpose of protection. No more anti-theft packaging, no more dishonest oversized boxes. You know the ones I mean, huge packaging, small product. And the token gestures we make at being more sustainable and reducing plastic waste, such as banning straws and charging for carrier bags, can now be addressed meaningfully at the source of production. Production can now make changes with pollution and sustainability at the forefront of their work without the unnecessary complications that the monetary system requires. The benefits really are endless. And just by consolidating our production and working smarter, we can make serious advances in lowering production, becoming more sustainable and reducing waste and pollution. Not to mention the huge amount of human resource we would also save just in these processes. And this really is not possible in the current systems that we operate. And of course, we would also need a medium-term plan that would consider the next stepping stones we would need to achieve once we have completed our short-term plans. And I won't go into that now, but you will find a lot more detail in the free downloadable PDF. Details somewhere below, I hope. So now we know what physical resources we have for our short and medium-term plans. And we now need to consider what human resources we have at our disposal. In the book I go through in more detail how we could measure our resources in this area. But to summarise, we would need to treat this part of the plan exactly the same as we did with the physical resources. And depending upon our needs, we could find we have a short-term problem with manpower or expertise in the farming industry, just as an example. And this can then be addressed in two ways. The first is to simply hire expertise from outside of our society. Remember, we will still have income coming in from other non-member countries that we can utilise to pay these wages. The second solution is more of a medium-term solution that we would need to address through education, and this is obviously the more preferable route. We may identify that in 5 years' time that we may not have enough skilled technicians, for example. And we will cover education later in another presentation, but let's just say for now that this gap could be filled simply through the education system. As well as consolidating our production, we will also look at automating everything in our society that does not need a human being. So all production, deliveries, even cleaning, all mundane tasks will need to be automated because that is our goal. So now we have a problem, or it might appear to be a problem at first. Automating as many jobs as possible will of course lead to mass unemployment. And also ending the monetary system will lead to massive job losses from anyone involved in finance, banking, insurance, stockbrokers, accountants, or anyone solely processing monetary transactions as their job role. Even marketing roles and PR to a lesser degree will now not be required, as these positions currently serve to increase demand. This represents a huge percentage of the population that will now have no job, roughly 30% of the population. Okay, let's quickly summarise. So we've committed to move to a money-free society. And we've now taken an inventory of our natural, physical and our financial resources. And this also includes human resources and specifically skill sets required to meet our future plans. And we've now committed to make a significant part of our society essentially redundant through automation. Plus we've made everyone whose job role specifically is handling money also redundant. So what good will these changes do for us? What's the benefit? Okay, so here comes the fun part. All this work allows us to rethink our lives and to re-evaluate our priorities, the working week in particular. So let me ask you something. Do you think that working 5 days a week with only the weekend to relax and enjoy family life is a good and healthy way to spend practically all your entire adult life? Do you think we should live to work or should we work to live? At this point, let's remind ourselves of the very important sentence from our vision statement. Freeing mankind from needless drudgery by utilising our immense combined intellect will be our shared goal, allowing all of humanity the freedom to experience life to its fullest and reach our greatest potential individually and as a collective. So the long-term plan, as we have discussed, is to automate all mundane jobs, allowing us to choose what work we do and what work we don't. But that is part of the long-term plan and almost certainly will not be completed in our lifetime to the level we could envisage. But do not be disheartened. We do not need to arrive at our final destination to reap the benefits of our current journey. We now have this huge extra resource in manpower, which means we can now be more creative. And we can utilise that resource for the immediate benefit of everyone within our society. How does a 3-day working week sound to you? In the book I propose that we reallocate the manpower into a job share. So the position you hold now is then shared with another person. And of course, for non-skilled and manual jobs, that would be quite an easy process to administer. For more specialist roles, we would need to look again at the education system. But with a 10 or 20 year run up to a completely money-free society, this would be quite an easy task in principle. But think of the huge benefits this would have. Firstly, think how much happier you would be with 4 days to spend as you see fit. Every weekend would be a long weekend, allowing you enough time to actually relax and pursue whatever it is that makes you happy. And don't forget, happy people are far more productive at work. The next benefit is that if we do job sharing, you work 3 days a week and your co-worker will also work 3 days a week. Well, we've now gained an extra day's work from your position that would benefit the wider society. So, shorter hours, happier worker, and more productivity. It really is a win-win situation. And what about if you own a small business, for example? Well, you could still be asked to keep that going if it provides a necessary service to the community. But now you can take a partner to share the workload, to share that responsibility. And the barriers that once stopped you doing that, profit, have been eradicated. Think also about how you could now run your business for the benefit of all without the worries of financing, profit margins, staff wages, and of course the one we all hate, the tax man. All those worries gone. You now need only consider how you run your business to the maximum benefit of your community and yourself, of course. Think how creative you can now be with the shackles of the monetary system removed. Or maybe you've always wanted to start your own business but never had the opportunity. Well, now you possibly can. I would suggest that if you can reasonably prove that there is demand and you have the skills, then the society would give you the resources. After all, why wouldn't it? You would be supplying a valuable service to the community. So you see how everything changes for the better when we remove the roadblocks that a monetary system artificially puts in our way. So now we're in a position where we've basically eradicated unemployment. How? Because the financial restraints we had previously that stopped people working in jobs that needed doing have been removed. If we need more nurses, then the only issue is appealing to enough people who would commit to that career. There will be no shortage of work to do. The only challenge we face now is ensuring enough people want to work. The medium to long term looks brighter, as we will see when we look at this in more detail under education. But there are considerations we must be aware of for the first stage of the rollout. And the ideals of the global free society is that we will never force anyone to do anything against their will. And that includes work. As you've been listening to this presentation and considering whether you would commit to work a 3-day week to support the future, you might also be considering the people that will not commit, that do not want to work. And I can almost hear your thoughts from here. What? Why are we going to give these scroungers free stuff for doing nothing? Why should I work hard just to keep these lazy good-for-nothings in food and clothing? Why should I do that? Does it go something like that? We have to keep the long-term goal in mind, and this forces us to consider what I call the damaged society. And I believe the damaged society is nearly all of us. For most of our lives, we've all worked hard, with a large proportion of society financially struggling just to pay the bills, to put food on the table. And I think the large majority have at least struggled financially at one point in our life, at the very least. This stress has had negative mental and physical effects on all of us. And we're so used to this pressure and just accept it as a way of life that we probably don't consider how stress brought on through financial worries affects our mental state and therefore our physical health. So of course, having the ability to not work will of course seem like a paradise to a lot of people. We have to accept this reality and realise that not everyone will want to support our goals with their own efforts. And it might mean that initially we do have to put some minimum requirements in place asking people to work, but that will not be the longer term goal. And any requirements we will have a set date agreed as to when exactly they will be lifted, thus giving us time to address any shortfalls in manpower through the education system, etc. And until we've shared our plans and gained a commitment, we just won't know. No one has ever done this before. But the good news is we won't need everyone to work to make this a reality, to be successful. We have manpower in abundance, and it will be using it wisely that is the challenge. To help us in this early stage of our plan, I propose a 3-tier system that just defines each member of society and their chosen category. So bear this in mind as we talk through this. It's always through personal choice which category you fit into. The 3 categories are contributing member, passive member, and non-compliant member. And I realise the final category sounds like something out of RoboCop, but it's the best terminology I could think of for the purposes of helping you understand the principle. We can always change that terminology later. So let's look at this and explore what this means exactly. A contributing member is someone who works and contributes to society. Simple. As a contributing member, you're entitled to all the goods and services that we as a society offer. Housing, a vehicle, electrical goods, entertainment, food, holidays, clothing, sports, everything you have access to now, but within reason. And we'll cover this in more detail later, as obviously there have to be some restrictions initially just for common sense. But remember, you might think these goods are free, but they are not free. You, as a contributing member of the society, are paying for these goods with your time, with your effort and your commitment. We have just removed the financial aspect, the middleman, the false control system, which is money. And now we will see the shops and the internet staff taking on more responsibility. Where currently they could be perceived as low-end job role, they will now be the guardians of our resources. Let me give you an example. If someone came into a shop and tried to take all the malt whiskey, then they would be stopped, because that's unreasonable, very unreasonable. They are now our collective resources available for everyone. And as I said in previous presentations, with greater freedoms comes greater personal responsibility. And the other very positive aspect is that now we can recognise the work of society members that previously we did not consider as job roles. Mothers raising children, family members looking after sick or ageing relatives, homeschoolers can now all be considered as the valuable job roles they are, because they all contribute to society, and as such would come under the category of contributing member with all the benefits associated. And this step alone would raise the quality of life in all of our participating countries. Think of the immediate benefits that would bring, not just to you, but to your family and to your friends. Granted, if we change the system tomorrow, a lot of people would rather stay at home and not work. But remember, we have 10 to 20 years to prepare from the point that we commit. So that's plenty of time to plan, to incentivise, to encourage and inspire people to want to work towards a much fairer society. One that secures the future for you, your children, and your children's children. And a society where you will work through choice, not necessity. And by then the education system will be bringing through a younger generation into the overall working pool. And a generation, I would argue, that are not damaged by the monetary system and are more mentally, ethically and socially adjusted and responsible. Passive members. Passive members are those that are able to work but choose not to for whatever reason. So what I'm proposing is that everyone will be entitled to the basics we need to live and survive. even the passive members. So housing, energy, transport, communications, food, clothing, healthcare, and of course education. Hardly basic, but with all these services available to everyone in our society, the overall standard of living will increase in each and every area for us all. And all these rights should be a given for absolutely everybody. But as an incentive and to encourage people in the initial phases, we could give all contributing members more, I don't want to say more privileges, because that's not what they are. Let's say advantages or priorities. So advantages could be one way in which we initially incentivize people to work. And remember, it'll just be 3 days a week is what our target is. And this also appeases, maybe ever so slightly, those who would be against anyone not contributing and receiving the toils of our collective labour. So those that support the system could be given additional benefits initially, such as only allowing contributing members to forward order certain products, new phones or computers for example. And by the way, forward ordering is a very important aspect of reducing our wastage and gauging our society-wide demand. And I go into a lot more detail about that in the book. And also in the book, I go through many additional benefits that could be used to incentivize people to become active participants in building a new future. So contributing members. So in summary, a contributing member would receive priority in most areas, so housing, electronics, clothing, holidays, hotels, restaurants, etc. But not medical care, because that of course would need to be on a case-by-case basis. Anyway, despite my own opinions, in the event we would decide by a process of pure democracy. And pure democracy we will cover in a lot more detail in the very next presentation. So, for a passive member, you will be looked after within our society. And my feelings are that the amount of passive members will be at the highest at the beginning and reduce drastically as the society progresses. And the real acid test will be when the younger generation, not damaged by the monetary system, come of age with a much stronger sense of community and purpose. And I guess it all boils down to your own belief in humanity. If you believe the bad press we constantly give ourselves, then I guess you think non-contributing members is going to be a major problem. Personally, I do not. And I've been lucky enough to travel the world and meet people from all countries. And I have a huge amount of faith in humanity, and I really do believe we are an amazing species. I've seen so many random examples of immeasurable kindness, unselfishness, consideration and empathy that I know mankind will rise to this challenge. And why wouldn't we? Look what we have to gain. Of course, there will always be those in society that will constantly break the laws and cause violence to people and damage to property. And this leads us into our next category, the non-compliant member. So quite simply, these are the lawbreakers. And for the purpose of this discussion, let's break this down into serious and non-serious. Serious, obviously, would be murder, rape, and maybe theft on a grand scale. Maybe even crimes against our society, so interfering with the voting process, for example. But let's start with the non-serious, the repeated petty offenders, the small-scale theft, damage to property, etc. Crimes that typically would not result in a prison sentence. So now we have a slight problem. Most of the time we threaten or punish people with hefty fines. And now we do not have the monetary system, we maybe need to look at a newer solution for this. What punishments and deterrents can we put in place to persuade people to abide by the law? It's an interesting dilemma, don't you think? So while we're here, let's rethink the whole crime punishment scenario. Ideally, I think we would look for a solution where petty criminals' punishment would be of benefit to the person they committed the act to, or our society in general if it was a victimless crime. That makes sense, right? The idea I propose and put forward in the book is basically to utilise community service as that tool. In my solution, jail is not an option, and we will cover incarceration in more detail very shortly. And instead I propose that if you are committed of a petty crime, you pay back that person with your labour. And it could be as simple as painting their fence, cutting their grass, or helping them in any way the victim sees fit. Within reason, of course. And the idea is to put the power back in the hands of the victim, who will personally get some value from the indiscretion against them, and a chance for them to physically see justice. Maybe even a chance of some healing between the two parties, who knows. But of course not everyone would welcome that solution, so instead could opt for the criminal to do work on behalf of the local community, the elderly or the needy. It could even just be litter picking, graffiti removal, or all really dependent upon the criminal's abilities. Maybe they're an electrician or a plumber, and this would be in addition to their current job role, assuming they have one. And if they didn't have a job role, then we just gained a person for 5 days a week until the end of their sentence. Personally, I would rather pay a fine than do that kind of work for a month or more, but that's the good thing about the system. Fines are not an option now, so this new way acts as more of a deterrent in my very humble opinion. And the good thing is the victim and society sees the benefit from the sentence. Surely that's more like real justice. But what if they refuse to do their punishment or don't complete it in a satisfactory way? Then they are recategorised as a serious offender, and I do have another solution for them. So serious offenders. In my book I cover this topic much later under tactics, but for ease of flow let's cover this in more detail here as we're talking and looking about how society could function or prosper without a monetary system. One thing that has always confused me is our prison system. Maybe it's just me, but I've always thought what a waste of time and resource the prison system solution is globally. To me it seems quite barbaric to lock someone up for years on end in a tiny cell with maybe an hour or more for food and exercise. How the hell will that ever reform anyone? What benefit is that to anyone? What complete waste of resource in facilities and personnel. In fact, we can see from many studies that instead of reforming people, the prison system actually produces more hardened and well-connected career criminals. It seems obvious to me that this solution just does not work for us anymore. I mean, do the inmates sit in their prison cell for the first full term analysing where they went wrong and repenting their actions? Clearly not in most cases, and not from the evidence we see. So what if we had a system for the most serious offenders that did not utilise a huge amount of resources in property and manpower? Or one that put the lives at risk for those guarding the prisoners? What if there was another system that allowed the criminal to experience living in a society without the protection our simple laws offer? Wouldn't that be a good way to help them realise the impact of their crimes? Wouldn't that help them understand firsthand the benefits of abiding by our simple laws? So this new system I now propose is not actually new. It's one of the oldest systems mankind has used for removing undesirables from society. It's called excommunication or banishment. And one of the example countries I use in the book is Russia. And Russia has many advantages to offer a global free society, but for the purposes of this example, we will just look at their largest asset, which is land. And what I propose is that we take a large expanse of land, say roughly the size of Switzerland, and devote that to allowing our most hardened criminals the ability to live life without any laws or rules. After all, that's the life that they're pursuing, isn't it? We would then give them the basic tools and resources they need to sustain themselves in their own community, basic tools to help them build their own society, and of course plants, seeds and livestock. And then let them develop their own society with their own laws or lack of. Leave them to it, basically. We would then need to ensure they don't leave that area and remain on that territory. And we wouldn't need to even build a big wall. We have the technology to put sensors all around that area, despite the huge size it represents. And these sensors would detect anyone coming too close to the no man's land, which would then trigger a response unit to intercept. And this would work because, how do I know it would work? Because we already have an area of extremely high security, about the same size as Switzerland, that operates exactly like this. It's called Groom Lake in Nevada and more widely known as Area 51. So it is possible to maintain a secure border without the expense of a wall. And when inmates have served their time, they can come to the collection post to start the process of returning back into society. And after serving their sentences, I believe they will be far more inclined to appreciate the benefits of our society than if they were holed up going mad for many, many years at a time stuck in a prison. Looking after our global prison population could be just one of the services that Russia offers our global society. And that's what the Global Free Society is about, global cooperation. I realise this is quite a dramatic solution, but then the Global Free Society is definitely about challenging our current systems and widely held beliefs and saying, okay, this may be how that we've always done things to date, but do we need to continue doing it this way? Maybe there is a better way. And now is the time and the opportunity to do that. I mean, can you think of another way? Another way that allows those committed of very serious crimes to experience living in the world without the basic human rights of safety and freedom that we offer. A system that uses hardly any resources compared to the current models we see in place today. A system that actually helps the hardened criminals consider the consequences of their future actions in a much more relevant way. If you can think of a better way, then let me know. And for the petty criminals, what better way for them to serve their time than putting back into society? And if you are wondering who would do the less desirable jobs, now you know at least one solution. Implementation. First, let me explain that this section is all about how we could implement a moneyless system once we have agreement from the majority of the people in our society. It would also need to be in conjunction with all other countries that we've identified previously. And I'm not talking about the ones from our examples, but countries identified in our extensive research. And we'll cover this in more detail later. A global free society could not be implemented by a lone country, at least not as successfully as I envisage. And you can't have world peace with just one country. So the next part is not a discussion about how we go about getting agreement from our society, or how we get into a position where we can make this plan come to fruition. These are all extremely important parts of the plan and will all be covered in the very last presentation called Let's Make It Happen. So what we're dealing with here are the nuts and bolts aspects of going from a society ruled by the monetary system to a society where we rule the system. So let's quickly reorientate ourselves again as to where we are with the plan in context of this conversation. So 1, we've globally agreed upon a vision statement that outlines how we wish to live our lives, both personal and professional. 2, a worldwide inventory has been taken of physical and intellectual resources, and we've also made calculations to gauge future demand from founding members as well as countries that would be brought into our society at a later date. 3, construction work is now scheduled to commence to improve our society's infrastructure, schooling, manufacturing and leisure facilities in line with our needs. And obviously this will be done with the long-term goals firmly in mind. And sustainability and ecological issues are at the forefront of these plans. 4, we have a short-term and medium-term plan that everyone will be completely aware of, both inside and outside of the global free society. 5, the plan has been voted in by a system of pure democracy. Much more about that in a later presentation. So basically, we have now completed our research and are almost ready to start rolling out our considered and detailed plans. Almost. There is a pre-phase 1 period which I detail in the book, and it discusses how we would need to issue a new currency for the society. And this is not the currency we would utilise within our society, but a currency specifically for international trade. So trade outside of our borders. And there is a very good reason for this, which we will cover a little later. So, phase 1. Our first job will be to nationalise critical industry. And this could be all or some of the following. So, power generation, transport, healthcare, mining, telecommunications, education, vehicle production, and even banking. So in fact, any industry deemed critical to our success. And of course, this will upset some people, shareholders and directors of these large corporations. But we can look at ways of compensating them and maybe even helping them relocate outside of our society if they really don't want to support what it is we're trying to achieve. Personally, I think the biggest compensation would be knowing that they're helping in reshaping the world for the benefit of their own children and all the generations to follow. Knowing that my efforts made a huge contribution to world safety, poverty, reducing crime and securing a sustainable future for planet Earth would be enough for me. That's quite a lot of compensation in my opinion. But the needs of the many would far outweigh the needs of the few in this instance. But what would it mean to you? It would mean an immediate increase in your personal income. I mean, we haven't gone moneyless yet, we're building to that. In the first year of rollout, you could no longer need to pay for electricity, education, healthcare, and most travel. The exact services we would nationalise at the start of the rollout, we won't know until we've completed our thorough research. But how much would that example personally save you per month? And that's just what we could accomplish in the very first year. We would also have the option to look at making all mortgages paid up before we finally move to a moneyless society. The only need we would need to keep the payments going is to supply our society with finance to acquire goods and services from outside of our society that we can't temporarily supply ourselves. That would mean we could also look at people who are renting and consider the option of nationalising some or all of the rentable properties. But that would definitely have to be at the end of the rollout phase, as many people rely on that as a source of income. So think about that. If we're moving to a moneyless society, why would anyone want to keep additional houses unless it was, say, a holiday location? I mean, I own a second house which I rent out, but I only do that for generating additional income and long-term investment. But now we don't have a monetary system, would I still need the hassle of a second home? Why would I want to keep it? I wouldn't. Of course, in all cases where nationalisation or any society-wide strategy negatively affected an individual, we would have to consider how to compensate that individual. Phase 2. We still can't make everything free. Our strategy here is to gradually decrease the value of money over time. And this will help greatly, even just from a psychological point of view, when we do finally end the monetary system. And the tactic I suggest is to slowly start discounting our retail prices each year. The idea is to wean ourselves slowly off the drug that we call money. And in the book, the example I use is as follows. So year 1 and 2, we nationalise our critical infrastructure, making as many as possible free to all within our society, as we've discussed. Year 3 and 4, we mandate all retail premises to apply a 20% discount to their retail prices. Year 5 and 6, we increase that discount to 40%. Year 6 and 7, 60%. 8 and 9, 80%. Year 10, 90%. And year 11, we remove the monetary control system entirely. So over a period of just 10 years, your spending power would increase exponentially. But it could also be over a 20-year period, which might in fact be far more sensible. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Now we have several problems that I know will have popped into your head as I explained this. What about hyperinflation, I hear you ask? Well, we have two safeguards against this. The first is that, as we discussed earlier, we issued a new currency for use outside of our society. And this would be for our society, not the individual, to purchase goods and services we cannot produce ourselves at this early stage in our development. And this is backed by the assets we already discussed, so property, patents, copyrights, etc. So this is less likely to be affected by devaluation. Plus, if we're still exporting quality goods and services, we will be able to maintain a strong value. If the currency is affected, then this will mainly be caused by other countries' view of our progress, a psychological reaction which we can recover from. The currency inside our society we can control far more easily. And the first control mechanism we put in place is to ban price increases unless justified. So justified would be a higher spec or a better value product, for instance. Most goods in the market already have a stable pricing, and we could ensure opportunities do not overinflate their prices within our society. But bear in mind, we are applying the discounts to all of our prices society-wide. So not just retail, but wholesale and manufacturing too. This means that the manufacturers and stores will be getting their goods that much cheaper also. Plus, each business will no longer need to pay for critical resources that we've now nationalised. So only goods acquired outside of our society would be susceptible to price increases that could affect our society's profitability during this initial phase. And that's where the next tactic comes into play: indemnification. We would indemnify all companies over this period from making a financial loss. So if any company makes a loss that can be directly attributed to the practices that we've just put in place, then the society would allow that deduction in their tax returns. And we could also look at other measures to ease cash flow problems directly related to our actions. And this would only be necessary until year 11 or 20, when we finally remove the financial aspect altogether. So any debts you have outstanding from within our society's borders will be made paid on year 11 or 20. No more debt. The end of the monetary system, the end of control. But it's very important that although we are moving to a moneyless society, you must keep your payments up. I would suggest that if you default during this period, you will face the same measures you would if we were continuing with the monetary system. If we did not continue as normal before year 11 or 20, then the transition would be far more problematic for all of us. All monies you have personally in your bank will remain yours. Nothing will ever be taken away from you. That's the idea of the concept. The only negative that could affect you as an individual is that your spending power outside of our society could be reduced. So for holidays, etc. But remember, your flights to your destination will be much cheaper, if not free after 10 or 20 years, if you're using an airline from within our society. So I'm guessing initially it will go down in value. We don't know. It could actually even go up. No one has ever done anything quite like this before, so we just don't know. And in the book I go into much detail explaining how this would change the retail environment forever, and how we could reevaluate how we acquire the goods and services that we need altogether. I mean, do we really need as many physical retail stores as an example? How could we reappropriate these buildings? More housing, more leisure? There are possibly many solutions to the challenges that are going through your mind right now. So have a look at the PDF, and hopefully I would have offered a workable solution, because there will always be a workable solution. And these are just my solutions. They are not set in stone, and you will be invited to offer your opinion. It's a blueprint, don't forget. So it's been a long discussion, as ending the monetary system covers so many aspects of our lives that it was always going to be the hardest part for me to present to you. But we're still not even halfway through the entire presentation. And as we go through further, you will see that the other strategies that we will cover will also have a very positive impact on this topic. And you really do need to consider the entire global free society concept to fully understand what a positive impact this would have on all our lives. What I wanted to achieve in this presentation, this summary of the strategy from the book Global Free Society, was to at least make you think. I wanted to demonstrate how invasive and controlling the monetary system is by showing you how wonderful life would be without it. The topic is immensely complicated and I was never going to be able to cover all the points, even in a presentation that lasts over 1 hour. So much had to be left out. Having said that, let me just highlight the bloody obvious. Crime would drop immeasurably just from ending the monetary system. Wars would no longer be a rich man's game. A rich man's game where we're sent to give our lives for their personal profit and pursuit of power. And there's much more about this topic in the very next presentation. And healthcare would be a basic right for everyone, only restricted by our own ability and know-how, nothing else. I mean, imagine how your doctor's advice will now change once we remove the influence of Big Pharma and their pursuit of ever more profits. And think of the massive increase in psychological health just by removing the worry of all financial considerations, including your retirement. And quality food would increase as we re-evaluate exactly why we do manufacture food. So now it would be for pleasure and nutritional value, not for profit. And quality food will have a massive effect on the global health and also reduce our burden on the healthcare system. Reversing our current thinking on the work and leisure time balance will make life worth living for everyone. And this to me is the most important benefit of the entire concept. Apart from world peace, maybe. But quality of life should always have been our main priority, and now with this solution it can be. And now automation is our friend and not our enemy. And real initiatives to reduce pollution and our impact on the ecosystem can now be made globally. Consolidating production in all areas is the only solution I see on the table today that offers us real hope of a truly sustainable future. And removing inbuilt obsolescence, having upgradability and recycling incorporated at the design process will make a huge difference to our planet and all our lives. And the current capitalist model cannot resolve these issues. And we will only manufacture quality products that are all compatible because we've now removed competition. And I love stuff, so this to me is a revelation. And who would have thought that having the best of everything would be a byproduct of being sustainable? And at least we can now all view things with a true sense of value, a true sense of worth, and that includes us. And I do realise how difficult it is to consider a world without money because it's so ingrained in our psyche. So let me give you a visual representation of what physical adjustments you will need to make personally. Are you ready? All you would need to do is remove this part of your daily life. How easy is that? Apart from that, you carry on as normal and enjoy your new freedoms. Freedoms free of any man-made financial worries. Maybe you want to rethink who you want to be and how you want to now live your life. Maybe you didn't pursue a certain career simply because it didn't offer the right opportunity for you to earn money. It really is that easy. We just cut out the middleman, the control system. So I sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this discussion, and I hope to see you in the next presentation where we continue to be just as radical with even more benefits for you to consider.